Why do people give so many different labels to Pakistan? Some call it an ideological state, some describe it as a garrison state, while others even go so far as to call it a terror state.
The reason is that Pakistan is a complex country. Its identity was built on religion, shaped by the military, and later overshadowed by the rise of extremism. But Christophe Jaffrelot argues that none of these labels alone captured the full picture. Instead, he calls Pakistan an interface state.
What exactly does the term interface state mean in this context?
It means Pakistan constantly operates at the meeting point between domestic pressures and external influences. Its policies, economy, and politics cannot be understood without looking at how the inside interacts with the outside. This is why Pakistan appears both dependent on foreign powers and at the same time crucial for regional balance.
So Pakistan's fate is not shaped only by its leaders at home.
Exactly. Internal weakness and external support together define the country's path. That's why it is often seen as both a client state, because it depends heavily on foreign aid, and a pivotal state because it sits in such a strategically important region.
Why was dependence on outsiders so deeply rooted in Pakistan from the beginning?
From the very first day in 1947, Pakistan's leaders felt insecure. They feared India would never truly accept partition and might try to dismantle Pakistan. At the same time, Afghanistan refused to recognize the Durand Line and promoted the idea of Pashtunistan. This double pressure created a sense of encirclement, pushing Pakistan to look abroad for protection.
And the first external partner was the United States, right?
Yes, Pakistan presented itself to Washington as a strategic ally against communism in the Cold War. America accepted that bargain and offered military aid, financial support, and international recognition. Soon, Pakistan joined SEATO and CENTO, which gave it security guarantees but also locked it into dependency.
How did this dependency affect Pakistan's internal politics?
It allowed the military to become extremely powerful. Since most aid came in the form of weapons and security assistance, the army gained resources and influence. Civilian elites also benefited because foreign inflows meant they did not have to reform the tax system. Ordinary citizens, however, remained excluded, and this imbalance sowed seeds of long-term instability.
Can you give a concrete example of this pattern?
Take the Afghan jihad of the 1980s. Billions of dollars poured in from the U.S. and Saudi Arabia. Pakistan became the frontline state against the Soviets, but the money strengthened the military and intelligence services rather than building schools, hospitals, or industries. The effect was double-edged. On one hand, Pakistan was a key player in the Cold War. On the other, it bred extremism and weapons proliferation at home.
And history repeated itself after 9/11, didn't it?
Exactly. Between 2002 and 2015, Pakistan received nearly $30 billion from the United States. More than half of it was linked to security. For ordinary people, this meant little improvement in daily life. But for the military, it meant greater budgets, modern weapons, and continued dominance in politics.
Was this relationship with America stable?
Not at all. It was always transactional. Whenever U.S. priorities shifted, the partnership weakened. For example, when Washington grew closer to India, Pakistan felt betrayed. This instability pushed Pakistan to strengthen other alliances.
China must have been the obvious choice.
Yes. From the 1960s, after China's war with India, Beijing and Islamabad found common ground. China provided arms, technology, and even support for Pakistan's nuclear program. In return, Pakistan gave China strategic access to the Indian Ocean. Projects like the Karakoram Highway and later the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC, became symbols of this deep partnership.
How did this alliance affect Pakistan's position globally?
It gave Pakistan a sense of security, that even if America turned away, China would stand by it. But the effect was also limiting. China has its own interests and will not endlessly fund Pakistan. Beijing fears the spread of extremism into Xinjiang and avoids open confrontation with India. So Pakistan cannot rely fully on one side.
Another major partner is Saudi Arabia. How important was that relationship?
Very important. Saudi Arabia gave financial aid, cheap oil, and even indirect support for Pakistan's nuclear ambitions. In exchange, Pakistan provided military manpower. Thousands of Pakistani troops served in Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and the Gulf. The effect was that Pakistan became tied not only to Washington and Beijing, but also to Riyadh.
Did Saudi influence have consequences inside Pakistan?
Yes, and they were serious. During the Afghan Jihad, Saudi Arabia matched U.S. spending and spread its conservative version of Islam through thousands of madrasas. This had a deep social effect. It changed the religious landscape of Pakistan and fueled sectarian tensions with the Shia community, especially as Iran also sought influence.
So, Pakistan constantly had to balance between Iran and Saudi Arabia.
Exactly. It could not afford to alienate either side. This balancing act is another reason Jaffrelot calls it an interface state, always navigating between competing pressures.
Let's turn back to the domestic side. How did foreign dependence affect Pakistan's economy?
It weakened it. Because elites knew foreign aid would come, they avoided serious reforms. The tax-to-GDP ratio stayed among the lowest in the world, sometimes below 9%. Less than 1% of people paid income tax in the 1990s. The effect was devastating. The state remained poor, infrastructure underdeveloped, and inequality grew.
So, elites gained, but the ordinary citizen lost out.
Precisely. Civilian politicians and the military, despite their rivalry, agreed on one thing: use external aid instead of internal reform. This created a small establishment of powerful families and generals who dominated politics, business, and land. The faces at the top changed, but the system did not.
How did ordinary Pakistanis react to this?
Many felt betrayed. Some turned to the judiciary, supporting movements like the lawyers' protest in 2007, demanding rule of law. Others were drawn to Islamist groups that promised quick justice and social services. The effect was dangerous. When the state failed, non-state actors filled the gap.
And that led to violence inside Pakistan itself.
Yes. Suicide bombings, sectarian killings, and militant attacks spread from Fatah to Punjab. Thousands of lives were lost. For the first time, the military realized that internal threats had become more dangerous than India.
So even military priorities shifted?
Slowly, yes. Operations in Waziristan and other areas showed recognition that extremism had to be fought. But this was also the result of past mistakes. For decades, Pakistan had nurtured militants for foreign policy goals, and now those very groups were attacking the state itself.
That sounds like a cycle of dependence and crisis.
Exactly. This is the cost of being an interface state. External aid solved short-term problems, but created long-term instability. Domestic weakness invited foreign influence, and foreign influence deepened domestic weakness.
So what is the key lesson Jaffrelot gives in this introduction?
That Pakistan cannot move forward without breaking this cycle. It must reform its economy, build internal strength, and reduce reliance on external rent. Otherwise, it will remain stuck between being a client state, dependent and vulnerable, or a pivotal state, influential but unstable.
And that is the real crossroads Pakistan faces today.
Yes, and this book explores whether Pakistan will continue as a fragile client or finally rise as a pivotal state in the region.
Chapter 1. The Military and Democracy. Why is the military so central to Pakistan's politics compared to many other countries?
Because from the very beginning, the military has been the strongest, most organized, and best-funded institution. Weak civilian leadership combined with constant insecurity about India and internal instability gave the army both power and legitimacy.
So military dominance started right after independence?
Not immediately, but very early. In the first decade, Pakistan struggled with fragile governments and weak political institutions. Frequent dismissals of prime ministers created a vacuum. The military, trained and disciplined, stepped in as the only stable force. By 1958, General Ayub Khan staged the first coup, setting the precedent that the army could overrule civilian authority.
What effect did this have on Pakistan's democracy?
It stunted its growth. Every time democracy began to take root, the military intervened, arguing that politicians were corrupt or incompetent. The effect was a vicious cycle. Politicians remained weak because they were never allowed to complete terms, and the army justified more takeovers because politicians looked ineffective.
So, Ayub Khan was the first military ruler. How did he govern?
He introduced what he called controlled democracy. He banned political parties, replaced parliament with a system of basic democracies, and concentrated power in his own hands. On the surface, he brought economic growth and stability, but the effect was narrow development favoring elites while suppressing political freedoms.
Did people accept Ayub Khan's rule?
At first, many did because they were tired of instability, but by the 1960s, discontent grew. Protests erupted, especially in East Pakistan, where Bengalis felt marginalized. Eventually, mass movements forced Ayub to resign in 1969, but instead of democracy returning fully, General Yahya Khan took over.
And Yahya's era led to the breakup of Pakistan, right?
Exactly. Yahya promised elections but failed to respect the result when Sheikh Mujibur Rahman's Awami League won a majority. The army refused to transfer power, launching a brutal crackdown in East Pakistan. The effect was catastrophic: civil war, Indian intervention, and the creation of Bangladesh in 1971. This was the military's most disastrous failure, yet, even after that, the army remained central to politics.
After the 1971 defeat, did democracy have a chance to grow?
Yes, for a while. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto came to power and tried to assert civilian control. He introduced a new constitution in 1973 and reduced military influence temporarily. But he also relied on authoritarian methods, suppressing opposition and using security forces for his own political ends. This created resentment in both society and the army.
And that resentment led to another coup.
Exactly. In 1977, after disputed elections and massive protests, General Zia-ul-Haq overthrew Bhutto. This began the longest and most transformative military rule in Pakistan's history.
What made Zia's rule so transformative?
He combined military power with Islamization. By promoting Sharia laws and supporting Islamist groups, he built legitimacy among conservative forces. At the same time, the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979 turned Pakistan into the frontline state once again. Billions of dollars from the U.S. and Saudi Arabia flowed in, strengthening both the army and Islamist networks. The effect was long-lasting. The military gained international clout, while religious extremism became deeply rooted in society.
Did democracy return after Zia?
Formally, yes, after his death in 1988, but the military never left the scene. Civilians like Benazir Bhutto and Nawaz Sharif were elected, but they ruled under constant pressure. The army used the president, intelligence agencies, and even the judiciary to manipulate politics. Governments were repeatedly dismissed before completing terms. The effect was what scholars call military tutelage, where civilians were in office but not in real power.
So the 1990s were a decade of weak democracies under military shadow.
Exactly. Politicians kept fighting each other instead of building strong institutions. The army acted as the ultimate referee, deciding which government could stay and which had to go. This weakened public trust in democracy and allowed the military to remain the guardian of the state.
Then came General Musharraf in 1999. How was his era different?
Musharraf presented himself as a modernizer. He promised enlightened moderation in economic reforms. After 9/11, Pakistan became a frontline ally of the U.S. again, receiving billions in aid. On the surface, the economy grew and media expanded, but the effect was fragile. Growth was debt-driven, media was partly controlled, and democracy remained suppressed. His dismissal of the judiciary in 2007 triggered the lawyers' movement, which eventually forced him out.
After Musharraf, did Pakistan finally move towards real democracy?
Yes, to some extent. From 2008 onwards, Pakistan saw for the first time two civilian governments completing their terms. The 18th Amendment in 2010 reduced presidential powers and strengthened parliament. Yet the military still retained influence, especially in foreign policy and security matters. The effect was that democracy existed but remained incomplete, always under the shadow of the army.
Why has the military been able to justify such long dominance?
It uses several arguments. First, it claims politicians are corrupt and incompetent. Second, it presents itself as the defender of national security against India. Third, it controls narratives through media and education, portraying itself as the savior of the nation. These justifications keep its image strong in the public eye.
But what effect has this had on Pakistan's long-term development?
The effect is deeply negative. Constant interventions have weakened political institutions, discouraged accountability, and created a culture of dependency on the military. Civilian leaders rarely learn governance because their terms are cut short. The army, meanwhile, has expanded into business, land, and industry, becoming not just a security force, but an economic giant. This imbalance hurts democracy, economy, and society all at once.
Does this mean Pakistan can never escape military dominance?
Not necessarily. There are signs of change. Public protests, judicial independence, media activism, and growing middle-class awareness are challenging military dominance. The fact that civilian governments completed 2 terms shows gradual progress. But without strong institutions, the risk of backsliding remains.
So the chapter argues that the military is both the backbone and the barrier of Pakistan?
Precisely. It has provided stability in moments of crisis, but at the cost of stunting democracy. Its dominance has kept Pakistan in a cycle where real accountability and reforms are avoided. The challenge for Pakistan is to shift from military dominance to genuine democratic governance, where the army protects borders, but not politics.
And until that happens?
Until that happens, Pakistan will remain trapped at a crossroads, strong enough to survive because of the military, but too weak to prosper because democracy is never allowed to mature.
Chapter 2: Civil-Military Relations and Political Order in Pakistan. Why are civil-military relations considered the most defining feature of Pakistan's political order?
Because the balance between civilians and the military has never been equal. From early on, the military established itself as the ultimate power broker. Civilian governments may come and go, but the military remains permanent, shaping foreign policy, domestic politics, and even the economy.
But how did the military become so powerful in the first place?
The roots go back to partition. Pakistan inherited weak political institutions, but a strong military and bureaucracy. Security fears about India and Afghanistan gave the army legitimacy to dominate. Over time, it developed not only as a defense institution, but also as a political and economic player, far beyond its traditional role.
So, what makes Pakistan's military different from those in other countries?
In many countries, the military stays in the barracks and obeys civilian control. In Pakistan, the army views itself as the guardian of the state, not just of its borders. This self-image allows it to intervene in politics whenever it believes the civilians are failing. The effect is that Pakistan has never had uninterrupted democratic development.
Can we say the military only intervenes directly through coups?
Not at all. Coups are just one method. Even during civilian rule, the military controls policy from behind the scenes. For example, in the 1990s, governments were repeatedly dismissed with military backing. Intelligence agencies interfered in elections, media narratives, and political party formations. This indirect rule is often called hybrid governance.
How does this hybrid system affect democracy?
It creates an illusion of democracy, but without real power. Civilians may hold office, but major decisions on India, Afghanistan, nuclear policy, and even relations with the U.S. and China are controlled by the army. The effect is frustrating. Politicians are accountable to the public, yet they lack authority over critical policies.
What about the military's role in the economy?
That's a major part of Aisha Siddiqa's work. She shows how the military has built a vast economic empire, what she calls milbus, or military business. Retired and serving officers control foundations, land, industries, banks, and construction companies. The effect is twofold. It gives the Army financial independence from the state budget, and it creates conflicts of interest where generals benefit personally from military dominance.
Can you give an example of milbus?
Certainly. Organizations like Fauji Foundation, Army Welfare Trust, Shaheen Foundation, and Bahariya Foundation control everything from fertilizer plants and banks to housing societies. Retired officers get prime plots of land at subsidized rates. This blurs the line between national defense and personal enrichment.
What effect does this have on ordinary citizens?
It deepens inequality. While elites in uniform accumulate wealth, the average Pakistani struggles with poor education, healthcare, and jobs. Public funds that could build schools or hospitals are diverted to defense or military-owned businesses. This widens the gap between ruling classes and ordinary people, fueling frustration and resentment.
How do civilian politicians respond to this dominance?
Often with weakness or complicity. Many politicians rely on the army for support to gain or keep power. Some strike deals with generals, trading democratic principles for short-term survival. This undermines civilian authority even more, because instead of challenging military dominance, they reinforce it.
Does this mean Pakistan has never had true civilian supremacy?
Exactly. Even during periods of civilian rule, like the 1990s or after 2008, the military never fully stepped back. It allowed democracy to function only within limits. Whenever civilians tried to assert independence, such as Nawaz Sharif's attempt to control India policy, they faced resistance and sometimes removal.
How does the public view this imbalance?
It's complicated. Many Pakistanis admire the military for discipline and patriotism, especially compared to corrupt politicians. But at the same time, they suffer from the consequences of military dominance, lack of democratic accountability, suppression of dissent, and skewed spending priorities. The effect is confusion, respect for the army, but frustration with its political interference.
Let's talk about political order. How exactly has military dominance shaped it?
Pakistan's political order is not based on strong institutions, but on a triangular balance. The military at the top, civilian elites in the middle, and the public at the bottom. The military manages this triangle by co-opting elites and controlling narratives. The result is stability for the ruling class, but instability for democracy.
And what role do external powers play in this arrangement?
A huge role. The U.S., China, and Saudi Arabia have often supported the military directly, providing funds and weapons. This external backing strengthens the army's hand against civilians. For example, during the Afghan jihad and the war on terror, foreign aid flowed mainly through the military. The effect was to empower generals while weakening political leaders.
Does this mean Pakistan's political order is essentially military-led?
Yes, but in a subtle way. Direct military rule like under Ayyub, Zia, or Musharraf is only one face of the story. The deeper reality is a permanent imbalance where the military remains the real center of power, whether or not it wears a uniform openly in politics.
What consequences has this had for Pakistan's long-term stability?
Serious ones. By keeping democracy weak, the military has also kept institutions fragile. Parliament, judiciary, and media often bend to its influence. This discourages long-term policymaking. Instead of consistent reforms in education, health, or economy, governments are consumed by survival under military pressure. The effect is underdevelopment and political instability.
Some might argue the military at least provides stability. Do you agree?
Stability in the short term, perhaps, but not in the long run. Coups and hybrid regimes may stop immediate crises, but they prevent the growth of democratic culture. Without democratic culture, every crisis leads back to the military. That is not real stability. It's a cycle of dependency.
How do external wars and conflicts influence civil-military balance?
They strengthen the army. Wars with India, tensions in Kashmir, and involvement in Afghanistan all justify military budgets and dominance. Each external conflict becomes a reason to sideline civilians. The effect is that foreign policy is permanently militarized and opportunities for peace or regional cooperation are lost.
Is there any hope for civilian supremacy in the future?
Yes, but it requires stronger institutions. The judiciary must be independent, the media free, and political parties more accountable. Civil society and the middle class are also growing in their demand for civilian rule. The more Pakistan urbanizes and modernizes, the harder it will be for the army to control everything.
So, Aisha Siddiqa's main argument is that the military is not just a political actor, but an economic one too.
Precisely. She shows that military dominance is sustained not only by guns, but also by wealth. As long as the army controls vast economic resources, it will resist civilian oversight. True democracy requires dismantling mill busts and ensuring that the military is accountable to parliament.
Until that happens, what does the future look like?
Pakistan will remain a hybrid state, neither full democracy nor full dictatorship, always struggling at the crossroads. The army will continue to dominate, civilians will try to negotiate space, and the public will live with the effects of weak governance and underdevelopment.
Chapter 3. The Judicialization of Politics in Pakistan. Why has the judiciary become such an important player in Pakistan's politics?
Because in a country where democracy is weak and the military is strong, the judiciary has stepped in to fill the gap. Over the years, courts have moved beyond resolving legal disputes to actually shaping political outcomes. This is what Mariam Khan calls the judicialization of politics.
But wasn't the judiciary supposed to remain neutral and independent?
In theory, yes, but in practice, Pakistan's judiciary has often been politicized. From the early years, it gave legitimacy to military takeovers through the infamous doctrine of necessity. Instead of checking executive power, it often sided with the powerful, undermining civilian supremacy.
Can you explain the doctrine of necessity?
Certainly. It was a judicial principle invented in the 1950s that allowed the courts to validate unconstitutional acts if they were considered necessary for the state's survival. For example, when General Ayub Khan imposed martial law in 1958, the judiciary justified it under this doctrine. The effect was devastating. It gave the military a legal cover to repeatedly seize power.
So the judiciary was not an independent force at that stage.
Exactly. For decades, courts acted more as partners of the establishment than as defenders of the Constitution. They validated Ayub, Yahya, Zia, and Musharraf every single military coup. This created a culture where the Constitution could be bent whenever generals or elites desired.
When did this start to change?
The turning point came in the mid-2000s. General Musharraf dismissed the Chief Justice, Eftekhar Chowdhury, in 2007, which triggered the lawyers' movement.
This movement mobilized thousands of lawyers, civil society activists, and ordinary citizens demanding judicial independence. For the first time, the judiciary became a rallying point for democracy.
What effect did the lawyers' movement have on Pakistan's politics?
It was huge. It delegitimized Musharraf's rule and forced his resignation. It also restored a sense of power to the judiciary, which began to see itself as a guardian of democracy. However, it also created a new problem, judicial activism, where judges began interfering in political and administrative matters far beyond their constitutional role.
So the judiciary shifted from being submissive to being activist.
Exactly. Before, it was criticized for being too weak. Now it was criticized for overstepping. Courts started taking suo motu actions on issues ranging from corruption to pricing of sugar and electricity. While this gave hope that someone was holding politicians accountable, the effect was often instability because it weakened elected governments further.
Can you give an example of judicial activism affecting politics?
A famous one is the disqualification of Prime Minister Yusuf Raza Gilani in 2012. The Supreme Court removed him over contempt of court charges linked to corruption cases. Another is the disqualification of Nawaz Sharif in 2017 over the Panama Papers scandal. These decisions reshaped political competition, but also raised questions about whether courts were acting neutrally or under pressure from the establishment.
So instead of strengthening democracy, the judiciary sometimes weakened it?
Yes. On the surface, judicial activism looked like accountability, but in practice, it often paralyzed governments, created policy uncertainty, and gave more space for non-democratic forces. The effect was that Pakistan's fragile democracy remained unstable, despite having an empowered judiciary.
Why do people still support judicial activism if it destabilizes politics?
Because many Pakistanis are frustrated with corrupt politicians and weak institutions. They see the courts as the only place where powerful leaders can be held accountable. This public demand for justice encourages judges to play a political role, even though it sometimes undermines long-term institutional balance.
How has the judiciary's role affected its own credibility?
It has been a double-edged sword. When the judiciary stands against dictators, it gains public respect. But when it appears selective, targeting some politicians while ignoring others, it loses credibility. This selective justice makes people suspect that the courts are still influenced by the military or other elites.
Does Mariam Khan see this as part of Pakistan's hybrid political order?
Exactly. She argues that judicialization is not about strengthening democracy, but about managing political competition in a hybrid system. Courts become tools to discipline politicians, often in coordination with the military. So while the judiciary appears powerful, it is still tied into the same establishment framework.
What about the impact on governance and policymaking?
Judicial activism often disrupts governance. For example, when courts intervene in pricing or appointments, they weaken the executive authority. Bureaucrats become risk-averse, fearing judicial scrutiny. The effect is paralysis in decision-making, which hurts service delivery and economic management.
Do you think the judiciary can ever become a fully independent and balanced institution?
It is possible, but it requires broader reforms. Judges need to be insulated from political pressure, both from politicians and the military. At the same time, they must also restrain themselves from becoming politicians in robes. Only then can they provide genuine checks and balances instead of political drama.
How do ordinary citizens experience the judicialization of politics?
For the common man, it is mixed. On one hand, high-profile cases against politicians create hope that the powerful are not above the law. On the other hand, ordinary cases still take years to resolve. Millions of people remain stuck in slow courts, waiting decades for justice. The effect is disillusionment. Political cases move fast, but common people's cases remain ignored.
So,
The judiciary's involvement in politics is more symbolic than structural.
Yes, in many ways. It gives an impression of accountability but does not fix the root problems of corruption, governance, or inequality. Instead, it keeps the political system unstable, which ironically strengthens non-democratic forces.
Chapter 4. Federalism in Pakistan. Why is federalism such a critical issue in Pakistan's politics?
Because Pakistan is not a homogeneous state. It was created as a federation with diverse ethnic groups, languages, and regions. Federalism was supposed to balance unity with diversity, but in practice, the central government, and especially the military, have often concentrated power in Islamabad. This imbalance has fueled tensions between the center and provinces.
Wasn't federalism part of the original constitutional design?
Yes, absolutely. The 1940 Lahore Resolution, which laid the foundation of Pakistan, promised autonomy to provinces. But after independence, leaders like Jinnah and later central bureaucrats moved towards a strong center. They feared that too much provincial freedom would weaken national unity, especially in the face of India.
What effect did this centralization have on East Pakistan?
A very damaging one. East Pakistan, despite having the majority population, was sidelined politically and economically. Decisions were made in West Pakistan, and Bengalis felt excluded. Language became a flashpoint when Urdu was imposed as the sole national language, ignoring Bengali. The effect was growing resentment that ultimately led to secession in 1971 and the birth of Bangladesh.
Did Pakistan learn any lessons from losing its eastern wing?
To some extent, yes. The 1973 constitution recognized Pakistan as a federation with 4 provinces, each having certain rights. But in practice, centralization continued. The military and bureaucracy, both dominated by Punjabis, kept control over key resources, policies, and security matters. Other provinces, Sindh, Balochistan, and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, felt sidelined.
Can you give examples of this imbalance?
Take natural resources. Balochistan is rich in gas and minerals, yet it remains the poorest province. Revenues from Sui gas mostly benefit the center and Punjab, while local people see little development. The effect is alienation and periodic insurgencies. Similarly, Sindh complains about unfair distribution of water from the Indus, which fuels tensions with Punjab.
How has federalism evolved since the 2000s?
A major development was the 18th Amendment in 2010. It devolved significant powers from the center to the provinces, including education, health, and local governance. It also abolished the concurrent list, giving provinces more autonomy. On paper, this was a landmark in strengthening federalism.
Did the 18th Amendment change things on the ground?
It improved provincial authority, but challenges remain. Many provincial governments lack capacity to manage devolved sectors effectively. Corruption and weak institutions mean that people often don't see better service delivery. At the same time, the federal government sometimes resists full devolution, creating new conflicts.
What effect has federalism had on national unity?
It's a mixed picture. On one hand, giving provinces more autonomy has reduced separatist demands. For example, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa now feels more integrated after receiving recognition of its identity and greater control over resources. On the other hand, in Balochistan, grievances remain strong because local people feel their resources are exploited without fair compensation.
How does the military view federalism?
The military traditionally favors centralization. It believes too much provincial autonomy could weaken national security and encourage separatism. As a result, the army often intervenes directly in provinces, particularly Balochistan and Sindh. The effect is a paradox. Attempts to enforce unity through force end up deepening divisions.
What role does ethnicity play in federal politics?
A major one. Pakistan is a multi-ethnic country. Punjabis, Sindhis, Pashtuns, Baloch, Saraikis, and others. Federalism should accommodate these identities, but instead, policies have often privileged Punjab, the largest province. This ethnic imbalance has fueled nationalism in smaller provinces, with some groups demanding more autonomy or even independence.
Has devolution helped in addressing ethnic grievances?
To some degree, yes. For instance, Sindh has greater control over education and culture, allowing it to preserve Sindhi language and identity. But where resources are concerned, like water, gas, and minerals, conflicts persist. Without fair distribution, ethnic grievances remain unresolved.
How does federalism affect economic policy?
It complicates it. Provinces now get a larger share of the National Finance Commission, NFC, award, which divides federal revenues. This gives them more resources, but also creates fiscal pressure on the center, which still bears responsibility for defense and debt servicing. The effect is constant tension between federal and provincial governments over money.
What about local governments? Do they play a role in federalism?
Yes, but unfortunately, political elites in both federal and provincial governments often resist empowering local governments. Devolution to the provinces has happened, but devolution within provinces is weak. This means ordinary citizens still struggle to get services at the grassroots level, limiting the full benefits of federalism.
Can federalism strengthen democracy in Pakistan?
Absolutely. Federalism spreads power across provinces, preventing over-centralization in Islamabad. It allows diverse identities to coexist within one state. If implemented sincerely, it can build trust and stability. But if the center continues to dominate, federalism will remain more theory than practice.
How does federalism link with Pakistan's security problems?
Very directly. When provinces feel excluded, separatist movements emerge, like in Balochistan. The military responds with force, which breeds more resentment. This cycle of neglect and repression destabilizes security. By contrast, genuine federalism, where provinces control resources and have a voice, could reduce violence and strengthen national integration.
What effect does federalism have on ordinary citizens?
For most people, it matters in access to services like schools, hospitals, and local governance. If provinces use their powers responsibly, citizens can benefit from more localized and responsive government. But when corruption and inefficiency persist, citizens feel abandoned, blaming both the center and the province.
So, what is Jaffrelot's main argument in this chapter?
He argues that federalism is both Pakistan's challenge and its opportunity. It is the only way to manage diversity and maintain unity. But unless the state genuinely respects provincial autonomy and distributes resources fairly, federalism will remain a source of conflict rather than harmony.
And what does this mean for Pakistan's future?
It means Pakistan's survival as a stable state depends on federalism. If autonomy is respected, the federation can hold together and even thrive. If centralization continues, resentment will deepen and the risk of fragmentation will always loom in the background.
Why are political parties so central to the story of Pakistan's democracy?
Because political parties are the vehicles through which citizens connect to the state. They mobilize people, contest elections, and form governments. But in Pakistan, parties have struggled to function effectively because they operate in a political system dominated by the military and bureaucracy. This constant interference has stunted their growth.
Were parties weak from the very beginning?
Yes, the weakness started right after independence. The Muslim League, which led the movement for Pakistan, was strong as a nationalist force, but weak as an organizational party. After partition, it fragmented into factions and failed to establish deep roots in society. This early weakness left space for the military and bureaucracy to dominate politics.
How have decades of military rule shaped political parties?
Every military regime tried to weaken parties and replace them with controlled systems. Ayub Khan banned parties and introduced the basic democracy system.
Zia-ul-Haq manipulated Islam to sideline secular parties. Musharraf promoted a king's party, the PMLQ, to engineer controlled democracy. The effect was that parties never had consistent opportunities to develop as independent democratic institutions.
What about their internal structure? Have Pakistani parties been democratic inside?
Not really. Most parties are family-run or personality-based. The Bhuttos dominate the PPP, the Sharifs control PMLN, and the Khans lead PTI. Internal party elections are rare or symbolic. This personalistic nature weakens institutions because loyalty to individuals replaces loyalty to rules or ideology. The effect is political instability whenever leadership faces crisis.
How do political parties survive in such an environment?
They survive by adapting. Some strike deals with the military to gain space, while others rely on dynastic networks to maintain voter loyalty. Patronage politics, distributing jobs, contracts, or favors, becomes more important than ideology. This survival strategy keeps parties alive, but it also prevents them from becoming programmatic or reform-oriented.
Can you give examples of patronage politics?
Certainly. In rural Sindh, the PPP often wins because feudal landlords control votes and distribute favors. In Punjab, PMLN has built networks of contractors and businessmen tied to development projects. PTI, while newer, has also relied on electables, local influential figures who bring votes in exchange for access to state resources. This system rewards loyalty, not merit.
And what effect does this have on governance?
A damaging one. Instead of focusing on policies like education, health, or tax reform, governments often focus on rewarding allies and punishing rivals. State institutions are politicized and resources are distributed unevenly. Ordinary citizens see little improvement in services, which deepens frustration with democracy.
How do parties behave differently under dictatorship and democracy?
Under dictatorship, parties either resist or collaborate. Some leaders, like Zulfikar Ali Bhutto in the 1970s, resisted military rule and mobilized the masses. Others, like many factions during Musharraf's era, collaborated to gain short-term benefits. Under democracy, parties compete, but they still operate under the shadow of the military. This duality, resisting and adapting, defines their survival strategy.
Have new parties brought any change to this pattern?
PTI was seen as a break from traditional politics with its anti-corruption and reformist agenda. It attracted the urban middle class and youth. But over time, it too relied on traditional electables and compromises with the establishment. The effect shows how difficult it is for any party to escape the structural constraints of Pakistan's politics.
What about ideology? Do Pakistani parties have clear ideological positions?
Ideology exists but is often flexible. The PPP was founded on socialist ideas, but over time it shifted to pragmatism. PMLN presents itself as pro-business and conservative. PTI mixes nationalism, Islamic values, and populism. Yet in practice, all three focus more on power than on consistent ideology. The effect is that voters often choose based on personalities, patronage, or ethnicity rather than clear programs.
How do voters view these parties?
Many voters see them as corrupt and self-serving, but they still vote because parties are linked to local networks of power. In rural areas, people vote as groups under landlords or tribal leaders. In urban areas, ethnic and class identities play a big role. The effect is limited programmatic voting, where issues like education or healthcare rarely dominate campaigns.
How do parties contribute to instability in Pakistan?
Their constant infighting weakens democracy. Instead of uniting to resist military dominance, parties often ally with the military against rivals. This zero-sum game makes it easy for generals to act as arbiters. The effect is that the democratic process remains fragile, with frequent dismissals, protests, and political crises.
Do parties have any success stories?
Yes, there are some.
The PPP introduced the 1973 Constitution, which remains the backbone of Pakistan's democracy. PMLN expanded infrastructure and helped pass the 18th Amendment, which strengthened federalism. PTI expanded social programs like health cards in some provinces. These examples show that despite weaknesses, parties do deliver at times.
How does international involvement affect Pakistan's parties?
External powers often deal directly with the military, sidelining parties. For example, during the Afghan Jihad or the War on Terror, aid went primarily to generals. This deprived parties of resources and influence. At the same time, global democracy movements and donor support have pressured parties to appear more democratic. The effect is a strange mix of dependency and adaptation.
Can political parties reform themselves?
They can, but it is difficult. Internal democracy, transparent financing, and issue-based politics are necessary reforms. However, family dynasties and patronage networks resist change. Unless voters demand it strongly, parties will continue to operate in old patterns.
So, what is Maryam Mufti's main argument in this chapter?
She argues that Pakistan's parties survive in a gray zone between dictatorship and democracy. They are neither fully democratic nor completely irrelevant. Their survival depends on adapting to military dominance and exploiting patronage networks. This survival has kept democracy alive, but in a weak and distorted form.
And what does this mean for Pakistan's democratic future?
It means that democracy will remain fragile unless parties transform themselves into real democratic institutions. They must move beyond family dynasties, strengthen internal structures, and prioritize public policy over patronage. Without these reforms, parties will remain vulnerable to manipulation, and Pakistan's democracy will remain incomplete.
Chapter 6: Dynastic Rule in Pakistan. Why is dynastic politics such a dominant feature in Pakistan?
Because political parties in Pakistan are not built on strong institutions or ideologies. They are built around personalities and families. Leadership is inherited rather than earned, which means dynastic families like the Bhuttos, Sharifs, and now even newer political clans dominate politics across generations.
So this is not just about one or two families.
Exactly. It's a widespread pattern. Whether it's the PPP under the Bhuttos and now the Zardaris, the PMLN under the Sharifs, or regional parties like the Chaudhrys of Gujarat, dynastic leadership is the norm. Even PTI, which claimed to break the cycle, has local dynasts who dominate constituencies.
How did this culture of dynastic rule emerge?
It goes back to Pakistan's socioeconomic structure. Landed elites and feudal families dominated politics after independence. These families used their wealth, land, and networks to mobilize votes. Over time, they converted political office into family property, passing it down like inheritance. The effect was that leadership became closed and exclusive rather than open and competitive.
What effect does dynastic politics have on democracy?
It weakens it. Democracy is supposed to provide equal opportunity for leadership based on merit. But when leadership is passed down within families, talented outsiders rarely get a chance. This discourages internal party democracy and locks political competition within a narrow elite circle.
Some argue dynastic leaders at least provide stability. Is that true?
To some extent, yes. Dynastic families often enjoy loyal vote banks because of their name recognition and legacy. For example, in Sindh, the Bhutto name still commands devotion decades after Zulfikar and Benazir. This loyalty can create stability for parties, but it comes at the cost of renewal and innovation. The effect is stagnation. Old names dominate, but problems remain unsolved.
Can you give examples of dynastic succession in Pakistan?
Certainly. After Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's execution, his daughter Benazir inherited PPP leadership, After her assassination, her son Bilawal, still very young, was declared chairman. In PMLN, Nawaz Sharif's daughter, Mariam Nawaz, is groomed as successor. Shahbaz Sharif's son, Hamza, is also positioned in leadership. Even smaller regional parties, like the Bugti family in Balochistan or the Achakzais in Pashtun areas, follow dynastic patterns.
How does this affect the quality of leadership?
It narrows it. Instead of selecting the most capable individuals, parties often elevate heirs regardless of experience or skill. Some may grow into leadership, like Benazir Bhutto, who became a charismatic leader, but others struggle, relying on their family name without real vision. The effect is inconsistent leadership and shallow policymaking.
Do ordinary voters accept this system?
Surprisingly, many do. In rural areas, loyalty to families is tied to local power structures, kinship, and patronage. People vote for names they trust or feel dependent on. In urban areas, there's more frustration with dynasties, but even there, name recognition matters in elections. So while people criticize dynastic politics, they often reinforce it with their votes.
How does dynastic politics interact with military dominance?
The relationship is complex. On one hand, dynastic leaders challenge the military because they have mass followings. On the other hand, the military exploits dynastic rivalries by supporting one family against another. For example, the Sharifs were once supported by the military to counter PPP. The effect is that dynastic politics both resists and enables military dominance.
Does dynastic rule exist in all provinces?
Yes, though in different forms. Punjab has the Sharifs and Chaudhurys. Sindh is dominated by the Bhuttos and their allies. Baluchistan has multiple tribal dynasties like the Bugtis, Maris, and Mangals. Khyber Pakhtunkhwa has families like the Walis of Swat or traditional Khans. Across Pakistan, family legacies matter more than party institutions.
Does dynastic politics unique to Pakistan?
Not at all. Many South Asian countries like India, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka also have dynastic politics. It reflects similar socioeconomic structures where family, caste, and kinship dominate political organization. But in Pakistan, the weakness of institutions and repeated military interference have made dynasties even more entrenched.
How does dynastic leadership affect party organization?
It makes parties hierarchical and centralized. Decisions are made at the top by family leaders with little consultation. Local leaders may have influence, but they rarely challenge the family core. The effect is weak internal democracy, where loyalty to the leader matters more than ideology or performance.
Can dynastic leaders still be effective in governance?
Yes, effectiveness varies. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto and Benazir had strong political vision and left their mark on Pakistani politics. Nawaz Sharif developed infrastructure and business-friendly policies. But others, like inexperienced heirs, often lack vision and rely on advisors. The quality of governance depends on individual ability, not the dynasty itself.
Does dynastic politics discourage youth and new leadership?
Very much so. Young activists often feel excluded unless they belong to influential families. This reduces innovation and keeps politics stuck in old patterns. Many educated youth, frustrated with this, either disengage from politics or look to alternative movements. The effect is a disconnect between the young population and traditional parties.
Could Pakistan ever break free from dynastic rule?
It's difficult, but not impossible. Urbanization, social media, and a growing middle class are challenging old loyalties. PTI's rise showed that a non-dynastic party can attract massive support. However, even PTI had to accommodate electables with dynastic backgrounds. Breaking free fully requires strengthening institutions and encouraging issue-based politics.
What reforms could reduce dynastic dominance?
Internal party elections, transparent financing, and empowering grassroots workers could open the system. Education and awareness among voters can also weaken blind loyalty to family names. Electoral reforms that encourage programmatic competition rather than patronage would help. But these reforms face resistance from the very dynasties who benefit from the status quo.
So what do Tudor and Zaidi conclude in this chapter?
They argue that dynastic politics is both a symptom and a cause of weak democracy in Pakistan. It reflects deep socioeconomic inequalities and lack of institutionalization. While dynasties have provided continuity, they have also prevented renewal. Until politics becomes more inclusive, democracy will remain shallow and fragile.
And what is the long-term effect of dynastic rule on Pakistan?
The long-term effect is stagnation. Politics keeps revolving around a few names, while real issues, poverty, education, health, inequality, remain unresolved. Dynasties keep democracy alive, but only in a limited form. For Pakistan to move forward, it must balance respect for legacies with genuine opportunities for new leaders to emerge.